Hello again. I really must apologise for disappearing for a week, but YouTube became irritated with me about a video of mine in which I mentioned viruses and they suspended me. They really are very touchy these days. I think it would be best for all concerned if I just kept off the subject of viruses entirely, even quoting the statistics given by the Joint Committee for Vaccinations and Immunisations was a little bit too much for YouTube, but there we are. Anyway, I want to devote a few videos to the subject of multiculturalism, and I thought that since Ireland is seemingly determined to go down this path, I would talk about that country today. The thumbnail to this video does not show what most of us would recognise as a typically Irish lass. She is the newly chosen Miss Ireland, who will enter the Miss World contest on behalf of that country. This is an interesting development, but the significance may not be immediately apparent to those who do not live in the country or know much about its history. Ireland is part of what is sometimes known as the Celtic fringe. These are the westernmost parts of Europe where languages, customs, beliefs, traditions of the Celts, who once occupied most of Europe, are best preserved. The Celtic fringe consists of Ireland, Wales, Western Scotland, Cornwall, the Isle of Manx and Brittany. It's an important region of Europe because much of the folklore, legends and languages found there are the last fragments of a vanished culture, a vanished European culture. It is in a sense a living repository of all kinds of folk memories which are at risk of being entirely lost and have been forgotten in the rest of Europe. The Irish have always been well aware of this and seen themselves as the guardians of Celtic culture, and quite rightly so. This is why such great efforts have been made to encourage the use of Gaelic in Ireland since it became independent of Britain. All this is now being seen as horribly parochial by the new batch of political leaders in the country. The focus now must be on being a global community, abandoning their own great traditions in order to become citizens of the world. They urgently want to send a message to the world that Ireland is no longer a Celtic nation with its own ancient history. Selecting a black African as Miss Ireland was part of that propaganda movement. Bearing in mind that just over a fraction of 1% of people in Ireland are black, or to put the case in another way, 98.7% of people in the country are not black, does anybody seriously imagine that choosing a black African of Nigerian heritage was simply chance and that ethnicity played no role in this matter? It's unlikely. In fact, this is a very public declaration to those who think of Ireland as having preserved another way of life and being slightly apart from the rest of Europe, something to be proud of. It's a declaration to such people that Ireland is as multicultural as anywhere else these days. We've seen in Britain the dreadful effect of abandoning our own traditional way of life and the replacement of our own customs with those of other nations. We've seen the effect that's had upon society. We may be global citizens, but all the things which made the British character so admired in the rest of the world have had to be jettisoned in the process. Ireland now seems to be hell-bent on the same deluded course. Good Lord alone knows what men like Eamon de Valera would have made of all this, but still. I have a particular interest in Celtic folklore and myths. I've got a book on the subject coming out in January. Much of the material I quote from it in it comes from the legends and so on from the Celtic fringe. What Ireland is now doing is scrapping its own special history in favour of the all-purpose multicultural mishmash which we see so much of in Britain. Keep going down that road and in a generation the Irish, like the British, will be in a fair way to be losing all that makes their country different. The worst bit of it is this, and that's that the supposed history with which they are replacing their own is rubbish. It's not really history at all. It's full of dreadful inaccuracies and downright lies. In the video which I shall release later this morning, we can examine what the Irish National Broadcasting Service is now transmitting for what they call Black History Lessons to mark Black History Month. And pretty shocking it is too. Ireland is no longer the last refuge for ancient British and Celtic history, but instead the new frontier for the propaganda and lies of the multiculturalists. One final thought is that the new Miss Ireland is a black woman from a Nigerian family. I wonder if any viewers really imagine for a moment that the next Miss Nigeria is likely to be a white woman from an Irish family. This is a difficulty which so many of us have with both globalism and multiculturalism. It does seem to be rather a one-sided affair.